Path of Exile 2 es un gameplay que sacaron ahora para el PC Gaming Show y tengo un poquito de hype. Vamos a ver el tráiler. Grinding Gear Games.
It seems the old ways still hold some power.
¡Oy! Ha salido de toda la sangre el oso, ¿no? ¡Qué bonic! Digo, hostia, qué gráficos más realistas, loco. Gráficos realistas nivel extremo, ¿eh? Mira el reflejo, ¿eh? El reflejo de... Buah, esto mi tarjeta no lo tira, ¿eh? Mi tarjeta gráfica esto no lo tira, ¿eh? Mira el reflejo de en el edificio. O sea... No, el mío tampoco, O sea, tantas texturas, mira, 1, 2, 3, 4, nada, demasiados elementos. Y mira todas estas rayas del tejado. Nada, demasiado jodido todo. No es para mí el Path of Exile 2.
Path of Exile 2 is basically our next generation action RPG. And one of the things we really wanted to make sure that we were doing with it is to make the action combat really, really excellent. We just want to make sure that anyone playing the...
¿Sabéis lo que me gusta de esta gente? Que yo los veo y digo, tienen éxito. Y son de los míos. Son unos putos frikis. Me gustan por eso, ¿sabes? Dices, ¡ay, Dios! Seguro que tienes alguna carta de Yu-Gi-Oh por ahí, perro.
The game, you know, you can play it like an action game. Feels fun to play. You know, we've added things like dodge rolls and like canceling.
Lo del dodge roll, eso es. Gracias, Lost Ark. Si has dado algo bueno a la vida, ha sido eso.
Things like this, and it just means that the game just feels a lot better than it previously did, as well as everything else that you'd expect from a sequel to Path of Exile.
One thing in particular that sets Path of Exile apart is obviously the depth, but in the itemization systems, crafting systems, but also...
Crafting system podría ser... No, por favor. Ya, gracias. O sea, crafting system, pesca... Déjame que lo compre, soy un aventurero, no tengo tiempo de ir a pescar. No tengo tiempo de ir a cazar. No tengo tiempo de hacerme una pelota de una bolsa, tío. Déjame que la compre con el oro que he saqueado de esa tumba de goblins. Déjate, tío. Ya, por favor, a ver si hay algún bastardo que hace un juego RPG que no tengas que hacértelo todo tú, tío. Eres un aventurero, tío, no un leñador o un... Putos pesados.
the sheer number of quantity of monsters, encounters.
Te estás matando ahí 100 dragones un día y al día siguiente pues esquilando ovejas para hacerte un jersey de tela. Es que no tiene sentido alguno, tío.
Like we have over a decade of content that is going to be available in Path of Exile 2 as well.
For Path of Exile 2, we really want to keep the mechanics from Path of Exile 1 that are great, but we can now have the opportunity to rebuild them or restructure them in a way that is easier to understand and much more accessible for...
Esto que tiene aquí el perro es que madre de Dios.
Restructure them in a way that is easier to...
Esto que tiene aquí al lado... Esta línea de aquí son marines. Y de hecho diría que son berserkers de Corne. O sea, esto es un ejército Warhammer.
To understand and much more accessible for someone coming at it for the first time and keep that depth.
A ver, que sea más accesible no es difícil, pero el Path of Exile 1 es complicadilla.
There, either hidden away or much more natural to understand.
I think there's a big difference between depth and complexity. Path of Exile 2 in some ways is less complicated than Path of Exile 1 because we've simplified the sort of technical complexity around doing things like the way you socket skills and things like...
Justamente los sockets no es lo más difícil que tiene el Path of Exile 1. El problema del Path of Exile 1 es la cantidad de capas que tienes, que ayer lo vimos con la season nueva, la liga nueva, que sale a finales de esta semana. Lo vimos que es que solo con la liga ya, solo puedes hacer lo de ascendente, que no sé qué, que no sé cuántos. Y dices tú, no, que esto se simplifica. Eso se simplifica cuando llevas 1000 horas y lo tienes dominado. Al principio... No, pero es que al principio no lo necesitas. Vale, no lo necesitas, pero sabes que está ahí. aunque tú no lo vayas a utilizar, sabes que existe, sabes que está en tu horizonte de sucesos eso. Vas a tener que lidiar con eso. Y a lo mejor simplemente el saber que está ahí te echa para atrás. Entonces, bueno, si han simplificado algunas de estas capas, pues vale, pero al final el problema es si tengo las mismas capas, aunque lo hayas hecho más fácil, pues bueno, me cansaré un poco más tarde, ¿sabes?
Like that, to make it easier to understand, but at the same time we're making sure that we keep all the depth in terms of character options and things that you can do. So everything is still there as far as like what can I do to build my character. It's just that it is easier to do so because you don't have to be worrying, for example, about when you're changing your items that you're going to break the way your skills are working and things like that. So I think that actually new and regular players can tolerate a lot of depth. It's the complexity that we want to try and avoid.
Vale, o sea, esto es complicado, ¿eh? Si lo consiguen está guapo, porque si consiguen que haya... Porque es lo que dicen, dice, si consiguen que haya profundidad sin la complejidad de los mecanismos, pues eso es la panacea, bueno, la panacea no, es la piedra filosofal, es la dificultad, yo creo.
The dodge roll actually came about because we really wanted to be able to find a way to having some skills that took longer to do than other skills. But the problem with that is that skills feel really terrible if you start them and then you can't get out of them. So we really needed a way to make that interruption be possible, and the dodge roll was a really great way to do it.
A ver, sí, lo de los dodge rolls o los rolls de esquiva, eso es muy guapo, tío. Es muy guapo que lo hayan puesto.
We actually already had a philosophy for Path of Exile 2 boss design where we wanted to make sure that everything was dodgeable. But previously we were just doing that by running around. But I think the dodge roll has actually changed a lot of things, and especially because, you know, now that you can expect a player to be able to do that, it means that we can have the expectation and the balance.
Eso era un oso. Eso. Vamos a ponerlo otra vez.
And especially because, you know, now that you can
Esto que vamos a ver ahora es un oso en llamas. Es un oso en llamas corriendo alrededor de un boss.
expect a player to be able to do that, it means that we can have the expectation
Preciosidad.
and the balance as well.
We've done fresh design on everything. We've taken some elements from PoE1 in terms of monsters, specific monsters, and brought them over and kind of because they were fun to play. Like, why not replicate something that is still fun to play? But of course, it's full fresh coat of paint. There are definitely new systems. I'd say a lot of the monsters are faster, for example, which is where the dodge roll helps to come into play. We have secondary AI systems that allow...
Claro, van a tener que cambiar los bosses que mantengan o los bosses que quieran pasar al 2. Los van a tener que cambiar ligeramente el gameplay, aunque quieran mantener el concepto y tal, porque el rol hace que cambie mogollón. Claro, el tema será luego ver si el rol, por ejemplo, hace que si hay una cosa que es un anillo, por ejemplo, de fuego, que va desde el boss hacia afuera, el rol te permite pasar a través del anillo, rollo si fuera un Dark Souls o no. Ese tipo de cosas habrá que verlo.
the
Sí.
monsters to do skills while they were performing another skill. Much like how a player can dodge roll to interrupt a skill, a monster can now do the same thing. We have a lot more monsters.
Además, claro, además puedes interrumpir tus propias skills, las que sean de castear, de no casteo automático. Bueno, claro, pero las de casteo automático incluso a lo mejor deben tener una ventana de oportunidad en la que puedes hacer rol. Eso está guapo, ¿eh? Eso está... Sí, esta gente se curra el gameplay, o sea que si están haciendo este tipo de cosas, supongo que en ello estarán pensando, y si no lo irán parcheando a medida que salga, o sea que hay que estar muy atento a este juego.
Monsters doing interactions with the environment. They'll interact with the world more, a lot more spawning from things, a lot more like in one of our areas, the Isle of Kin, we have monsters riding on top of another monster, and then when they get close, they all jump off.
¿Cómo suena? Suena bonito, ¿eh?
There's a lot of design changes that have had to go on to take into account the way that the new skill system works. So with something like the Mercenary now, we're developing how crossbows should work. We kind of really looked at that and thought, okay, how can we make crossbows just feel completely different than bows? You know, if you look at a shooter, it's like pistols and shotguns and things like that. Like, okay, what about those makes them different from each other? And so therefore, it makes the whole experience just feel so different than what a bow feels like now. You know, you want that like pull the trigger and it instantly fires, you know, that kind of instant response type of thing. And I think that as we approach each different character class, we're thinking like, how can we make the skills here feel so different than every other class?
For a lot of the really unique skill sets like the crossbows, which are almost basically guns, there's a lot of work that's been done in other games to make those feel great that we had the opportunity to bring into Path of Exile, and there's a lot of lessons of what works well in a shooter that can work well in an ARPG if you do the work, get the animations right, get the timing right. We've done a lot of core system changes to make it.
Claro, para que no sea lo mismo de siempre.
it so that it feels like you've got as much control as you would in a shooter-focused game. There's a lot of what have other games done well that we can bring into Path of Exile that no ARPG is really built on, because they don't have the crazy level of skill variety that we've ended up having.
So
Claro.
we've got a live stream later today where we're going to be showing off 2 of our character classes. We're really deep diving into the mechanics, and we're really excited to show that. So if you're interested to know more about Path of Exile 2, then tune into that later today.
Muy bien. Yo creo que pinta bastante guapo, la verdad, el Path of Exile 2.